Tonight at 10, the NHS under growing pressure, with staff absences rising sharply during Christmas week. The number of NHS staff off work in England because of COVID went up by more than 40%. The latest official survey also suggests more than 2 million people tested positive for COVID in the run-up to Christmas, adding to the problems of NHS staff.
The staff that are at work will be caring for more patients, trying to do more to cover for their missing colleagues, working extra hours, starting early, finishing late. The pressure will be immense.
And the new year has already arrived in many parts of the globe, with some countries carrying on with their parties despite concerns about the pandemic. Good evening. The growing pressure on the NHS has been brought into sharp focus by the latest official figures on staff absences related to COVID. Now, those absences in acute NHS trusts in England increased by more than 40% during Christmas week. An average of more than 25,000 health workers were off sick or isolating every day. And a new survey suggests 1 in 30 people in the UK tested positive for COVID in the period before Christmas, underlining the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. Our health correspondent, Catherine da Costa, has more details.
Most NHS staff will be glad to see the back of 2021. Nearly 2 years into this pandemic, many are exhausted. A spike in COVID cases is driving a rise in staff sickness. In England, London's worst affected, with about 4% of staff in acute trusts absent for COVID-related reasons in the week before Christmas, up nearly 60% on the week before. Many feel it's impacting on patient care.
The staff that are at work will be caring for more patients, trying to do more to cover for their missing colleagues, working extra hours, starting early, finishing late. The pressure will be immense.
In the latest infection survey from the ONS, infections increased across the UK to their highest level on record in the week to Christmas Eve. In England, 1 in 25 had the virus. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, it was 1 in 40. Infections doubled in a week in London. 1 in 15 would test positive. But there were big rises too in the Northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber and the West Midlands. And other regions weren't far behind.
And it is now the dominant variant.
Statisticians say infections are twice the level they were this time last winter in England because they're being fuelled by the more infectious Omicron variant.
So across all age groups, we are seeing increases, but particularly driven by those young age groups. We've seen increases among school-aged children fairly recently, particularly those sort of from nursery through to primary. But we are now seeing infections among older age groups as well. So they're sort of young adults from mid-20s to mid-30s, but spreading right the way up to some increases now in the over 70s, although they do remain the lowest group to be infected.
There's some more encouraging news on boosters. New UK data suggests a booster shot is 88% effective at preventing people ending up in hospital due to Omicron. And after a huge push, all UK nations say they've hit the target of offering all adults a third dose by the end of the year.
I would just say to people again, there's a 1.5 million slots out there over the next few days. There's plenty of opportunity. There's mobile vaccination units. There's GPs vaccinating. There's all sorts of ways to get vaccinated. And just please do come forward and as I say, help yourself, but also help reduce that burden on the NHS.
And now this, a second antiviral pill's been approved by the UK regulator. In trials, Pfizer's Paxlovid drug offered nearly 90% protection from severe illness and death among vulnerable adults. There's a glimmer of hope for the new year. Vaccines and new treatments should help protect the most at risk from serious illness. But there are huge uncertainties. If there's a sharp rise in hospital admissions, health leaders say ministers will have to act fast. Catherine da Costa, BBC News.
So let's look at the latest government data. A record 189,846 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. And the average over the past week is now more than 150,000 new cases every day. Nearly 12,000 patients were in hospital with coronavirus on the 29th of December. 203 deaths were recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. 110 COVID-related deaths were recorded on average every day in the past week. On vaccinations, 233,464 people a day had boosters on average in the past 7 days. That brings the total to almost 34 million. Now, no new restrictions have been introduced in England for New Year's Eve, but in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there are stricter rules in place for hospitality venues and indoor gatherings. People in Scotland and Wales have travelled to England to celebrate the new year, while Boris Johnson has urged anyone attending parties to take a COVID test beforehand. Our correspondent Olivia Richwald reports now from Carlisle in Cumbria, which is just 8 miles from the border with Scotland.
New Year's Eve in the border city. Carlisle Castle was once used to keep the Scots out. Now it welcomes them as they arrive in this centre. And earlier today, many Scots made the trip south.
There's nothing to do in the south of Scotland. So, I mean, this is the nearest place with stuff to do.
We're going to have a brilliant time, because that's what New Year's all about.
And they were ready to celebrate. The New Year's Eve party at the Holston Hotel was cancelled before Christmas to keep staff and customers safe. Tonight, the restaurant is busy and the rooms fully booked, many by Scots.
Tonight it'll be probably half of the central belt coming down. I think it's going to be busy. I think Carlisle will complain a little bit, but secretly will be quite happy. It's money in the till.
Scotland, along with Wales and Northern Ireland, have all introduced some COVID restrictions over the festive period, and that makes border towns like Carlisle even more appealing for a night out.
There are a lot of both English and Scottish people out enjoying themselves in Carlisle tonight, and some of the Scots admit they have come here on purpose to avoid restrictions back home. But just walking up and down some of Carlisle's busiest streets, people are telling us it is quieter than they would expect.
The Scottish Government had asked people not to cross the border.
Where have you come from today?
Glasgow.
You come from Glasgow. Why have you come to Carlisle?
Because there's no restrictions and all of our friends have COVID.
And were you put off by the fact that the government in Scotland said don't go to England?
No, definitely not. It encourages more.
You can drink down here, but you can't drink 6 miles down the road. It's not fair. It's not fair.
2 years of pandemic have been really tough, and tonight marks the start of a new year with fresh hope.
What's your message for New Year?
Love. One word, one life, live, love. Spread love. Happy New Year.
And that's one message which everyone across the UK can agree on. Olivia Richwald, BBC News, Carlisle.
Well, as we've been hearing, varying restrictions across the UK are having an impact on how people are marking their new year. The biggest traditional celebrations in the UK, of course, are in London and Edinburgh. So with just under 2 hours to go, let's see what's in prospect with Jean Mackenzie in London. But first, James Shaw in Edinburgh.
There's a strange atmosphere in this city tonight, Huw. There will be no big street party with tens of thousands of people. There will be no spectacular firework display at midnight. In the bars and the restaurants, in the streets below me, they're half full. There's security on the doors to make sure that the numbers are not exceeded inside those venues. Nevertheless, I suspect that at midnight, many people probably will come to this castle esplanade to mark the end of 2021, a very dismal year for many people, and to hope that the restrictions in place will not last beyond the date that has been set by the Scottish Government of the 17th of this month.
For the second year in a row, there'll be no fireworks display for the public along the River Thames this evening, and even the smaller celebration that was planned here for Trafalgar Square this evening has been cancelled. The Mayor of London took the decision that given the number of COVID cases, it was just too risky. But this hasn't stopped people coming to central London tonight to celebrate. The streets are busy, and they are getting busier and busier the closer to midnight we get. We've spoken to people who've come from the other end of the country to be here this evening, some of them very surprised to learn that there is no public celebration because there are no restrictions here in England on people socialising, so people can party in bars and in clubs. The only stipulation from the government, or the only request, is that they take a lateral flow test if they're going to head indoors this evening.
Jean, many thanks again. Jean Mackenzie there for us in central London, and thanks to you, James, in Edinburgh too, James Shaw. Let's have a look at some of the day's other stories. In the US, Prince Andrew's legal team has failed in its legal bid to stop proceedings in a civil sex abuse case. Virginia Giuffre, who now lives in Australia, has accused Prince Andrew of sexually assaulting her when she was a teenager at the homes of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Prince Andrew's lawyers argued that Virginia Giuffre is not a US resident and that her civil legal action should be halted. Prince Andrew has consistently denied her allegations. The prison sentences imposed on the killers of 6-year-old Arthur Labineau Hughes from Solihull have been referred by the Attorney-General to the Court of Appeal for being too lenient. Earlier this month, Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for at least 29 years for his murder, and the boy's father, Thomas Hughes, was given 21 years for manslaughter. A 15-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a teenager in Croydon in South London last Thursday. There was another fatal stabbing that evening when a 16-year-old boy was killed in Hillingdon in West London. It brings to 30 the number of teenage homicides in London this year, surpassing the peak of 29 back in 2008. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports now from Hillingdon.
In 2021's final days, paramedics tried to save 2 young lives. A 15-year-old stabbed in a park in Croydon, South London. And in Hillingdon, West London, a 16-year-old with a single stab wound in this green space. 2 new murder investigations and a record high for the number of teenage murders in 1 year.
Children are carrying knives because they feel like they need to protect themselves. And I'm putting a message out there to every child, please, you need to understand the pain of parents and siblings that have lost somebody to murder.
Violent crime is falling, but not when it comes to young people murdered in London. More teenage victims than the previous high in 2008 can't be ignored. For some time, and today, police have blamed
the glorification of knives on social media and credibility and people cussing each other on social media. We're seeing it again and again and again. At the same time, we've got changing drug markets and the emergence of county lines in the last few years that we're really focusing on.
That's a type of drug dealing which drags vulnerable children into being involved. In Hillingdon, people were worried about dealers using the parkland where the murder happened. This man didn't want to be identified.
They're obviously, trying to protect their grounds and their little drug lines that you've got going on and all that sort of thing, yeah.
It's a big worry.
It is when I've got children,
In Croydon, a 16-year-old's been arrested, and here the investigation continues. These murders will put the Metropolitan Police under pressure. But youth workers say we need to concentrate instead on the chaotic lives of some young people and the social reasons why their lives might be threatened. Tom Simons, BBC News, West London.
The popular American actress and comedian Betty White has died just a few weeks before her 100th birthday. Her career spanned 9 decades, from the earliest days of television in the 1930s and her own shows in the 1950s to the latest Toy Story film just 2 years ago. Betty White will probably be best remembered for her role in the 80s sitcom The Golden Girls, for which she won an Emmy. In 2010, she reflected on her long career.
I've been working in this wonderful business for 63 years now, and I'm so lucky to be as busy as I am, but as long as it keeps coming, I'm always worried about overexposure. So I'll say no when they stop asking me. So if you want me to retire, stop asking me.
Words of Betty White, the American entertainer who's died at the age of 99. Well, in just under a couple of hours, we'll be leaving 2021 behind and hoping for a rather better 2022 in so many ways. But the new year has already arrived, of course, on the other side of the globe. Australia was one of the first places to mark the new year with its traditional fireworks display in Sydney Harbour. And festivities around the world are said to be rather more muted in many places, with celebrations scaled back or cancelled. But some countries have held impressive displays, including the United Arab Emirates, which is aiming to break a world record for the biggest number of drones, launching waves of fireworks there. And that's it from the newsroom tonight. So on behalf of all the team at BBC News, I'd like to wish you a very happy and indeed a very healthy new year. Take care, all of you, and see you in 2022. Have a good night.